Welcome to Darklight Archives, where history isn't just taught, it's uncovered. Today, we're diving into the shadows of history to reveal the top 5 historical secrets too dark to teach in school. These stories are true, factual, and chillingly real. Prepare yourself because the truth is often far darker than we'd like to imagine. Between 1932 and 1933, under Stalin's regime, the Soviet Union implemented policies that caused one of the most devastating famines in modern history. Known as the Holodomor, or death by hunger, this event saw grain and food supplies forcibly taken from Ukrainian farmers as part of Stalin's collectivization program. Stalin aimed to crush Ukrainian nationalism and resistance to Soviet control. Farmers who resisted or failed to meet quotas were labelled as enemies of the people. Even as villages starved, grain rotted in government warehouses, and borders were closed to prevent people from escaping to find food. Cannibalism was reported as families faced impossible choices. Efforts to suppress knowledge of the famine were so effective that much of the world only learned the full extent of the tragedy decades later. The death toll is estimated between 3 and 7 million, a haunting reminder of how policy can be weaponized to destroy entire populations. For 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted the Tuskegee Syphilis Study in Alabama, targeting poor African American men. The study's purpose was to observe the progression of untreated syphilis, but participants were never informed of their diagnosis. Instead, they were falsely told they were receiving treatment for bad blood. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, researchers deliberately withheld it, choosing to let the men suffer, go blind, or die for the sake of science. Families of the victims were also affected, with some wives and children contracting the disease. The scandal only came to light in 1972 after a whistleblower exposed it. The revelation led to widespread outrage and the establishment of new ethical guidelines for medical research. However, the mistrust in public health institutions caused by this experiment continues to echo, especially in African American communities. The horrors of the Atlantic slave trade are often understated in history classes, leaving many unaware of its full scope. Over 12 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic between the 16th and 19th centuries, with up to 2 million dying during the voyage in what's known as the Middle Passage. Slaves were packed into ships so tightly that many suffocated. Disease, malnutrition, and abuse claimed countless lives before they even reached the Americas. Once there, enslaved people faced unimaginable brutality. In regions like the Caribbean, the mortality rate was so high that plantation owners considered enslaved individuals as disposable labor, relying on a constant influx of new captives. Rebellion was met with unspeakable violence. In Haiti, enslaved people who resisted were publicly tortured as warnings to others. Meanwhile, systemic efforts erased African languages, religions, and traditions in an attempt to strip people of their identities. This brutal legacy has shaped the cultural and economic landscapes of entire nations. The Industrial Revolution was a time of rapid progress, but for millions of children, it was a nightmare. In 19th century factories, Children as young as 5 worked 12 to 16-hour shifts in hazardous conditions. They were seen as ideal labourers due to their small size and the fact that they could be paid a fraction of what adults earned. In coal mines, children known as trappers sat in the dark for hours, opening and closing ventilation doors. In textile mills, young girls worked alongside spinning machines, risking dismemberment if their clothing was caught. Many suffered permanent injuries or illnesses like black lung from coal dust or spine deformities from years of stooping. These conditions were so widespread that reform only began after investigative reports, like those by Charles Dickens and journalist Michael Sadler, exposed the horrors. Even then, change came slowly, and the legacy of child labour remains a dark chapter in the story of industrial progress. The CIA's Project MKUltra, initiated in the early 1950s, aimed to explore mind control for use during the Cold War. However, the methods were ethically appalling. The CIA experimented with substances like LSD, often without the participants' consent. Prisoners, students, hospital patients, and even members of the military were subjected to psychological manipulation. Some were kept in sensory deprivation tanks for days, while others were dosed with hallucinogens at high levels, leading to psychotic breaks. One infamous case involved Frank Olson, a CIA scientist who reportedly died by suicide after unknowingly ingesting LSD during an experiment. Years later, Olson's family suspected foul play, and the details surrounding his death remain murky. The program was officially exposed during congressional hearings in the 1970s, leading to widespread condemnation. But much of MKUltra's documentation was destroyed, meaning we may never fully understand the program's extent or its impact. These stories remind us that history isn't just a record of triumphs, it's also a chronicle of human suffering, exploitation, and secrecy. If these tales have left you with questions or a thirst for more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me next time on Darklight Archives. Until then, stay curious, but stay cautious.